Okay, with this video lecture today, what we're going to begin to talk about is the study of leadership over the years. Now, this isn't in your notes as you take off, it's the outline of the notes for the coming pages. You might want to hit pause and write this down, and it helps you organize this lecture. Remember, if I ever get going too fast in one of these video lectures, just hit pause. And of course, you can always back up too. That's one of the benefits of it. But we're going to kind of look to the past to see where we got to where we are today with how leadership is studied and thought about. And the oldest approaches to leadership and studying it were trait approaches, looking at the traits of leaders versus non-leaders. And there's really two different camps for these. There are what they call the great man approaches. And forgive me, I'm not trying to be misogynistic or anything like that. This is what they call them. And this is going way, way back, hundreds if not thousands of years. And normally the leaders were men. So it was what determined they were a great man. Why? All right? Those approaches to studying leadership haven't been very good at predicting who will be a good leader. They have, though, given us insights into how we often pick our leaders. Now, more modern trait approaches, look at some traits that we do seem to have a influence over whether somebody will be a good leader or not. More modern still are behavior approaches. Behavior approaches try to look at the individual's behaviors of a leader, not necessarily their inborn or developed traits, but how do they behave when they are in leadership roles. Also individual approaches. How do leaders deal with individuals one-on-one? We often have the view of a leader up on a stage talking to everybody, but often what a leader is doing is one-on-one with individual people. And then finally, contingency approaches, which kind of look back at this and say, it all depends on the situation. All right, we have to diagnose the situation before we decide what type of leadership behavior to use. Now, we'll start out talking about those traits, behaviors, and really traits and leadership. Now, traits are the distinguishing personal characteristics of a leader. Their intelligence, their values, their confidence, their appearance. Those are all different traits. Now, early efforts to understand leadership focused on the leader's personal traits. How do we differentiate leaders from non-leaders? And these were often called great man approaches. Why is the king different? Well, the king's a man, all right. Also, things like the family you came from was very important. Well, who's going to be the next king? Well, the king's son is going to be the next king because there's some kind of mojo in there, that makes them the best leader going forward. That these are inborn traits that people have, and they're not really that controllable. Now, I flip this up, say, pick who's the leader. Well, most people, the first thing to their mind will go, well, if I had to guess, it would be this person's the leader. That looks like somebody's grandma. Well, if you picked this person, you would pick some B movie actor, and I found their picture online. They were in some Walker, Texas Rangers or some old show. If you pick this person, that's about the best picture I can find of her. You'd pick Colleen Barrett. She was there at the start of Southwest Airlines, was one of the key people, and for a while was her president. Herb Kelleher, who was one of the founders of Southwest Airlines, as well as its long-term board of directors member and CEO for a time, says if there's one person that influenced the success of Southwest Airlines, which has been one of the most successful airlines out there, it's Colleen Barrett. All right? What we kind of learn from some of these great man or early trait approaches is that some traits influence whether people think someone will be a good leader, but not whether they will be a good leader. All right, often we look at somebody and just kind of sum them up by the way they look. Do they look like the person who would be scripted in a movie to be a leader? All right, and that can be kind of a fantasy. We have to realize that's out there. I mean, one big thing is height. You look at presidents in recent times. George W. Bush, 6 feet tall. Bill Clinton, 6'2½". The father of George W. Bush, George H. Bush, 6'2". Ronald Reagan, 6'1". Barack Obama, 6'1". Donald Trump, 6'2". Joe Biden is 6 feet tall. All right? What kind of makes that interesting is the average height of a man in the U.S. is 5 feet 9 inches tall. The shortest of all these is 3 inches taller than the average height of a U.S. man. All right, that's from a New York Times article. One person that ran against Barack Obama was John McCain. Some people say he was doomed from the start. According to eyeballing estimates by even the latest discerning Americans out there, Mr. McCain is at most 5'7". Now, the last time any man under 5'8" had a taste of the U.S. presidency, his first initials were U.S., and he just commanded an army that united the states into one grand old nation. That's Ulysses S. Grant back in the 1880s. Oh, and he wasn't considered that short, since the average height of a man in the 1850s, they have at least, was approximately just over 5'7.5". All right? We kind of have this bias. Well, they got to look like a leader. Some of the charismatic stuff we'll talk about them later. Oh, they got a big personality. They must be a good leader. They could be a complete schmuck. All right? But we tend to get blinded by that, and we have to be aware of that. Realize these biases exist, but also see the biases in ourselves. When we're thinking who's going to be a good leadership candidate going forward, do they really have some of the things, other things we'll talk about in this class that we do find are associated with whether someone will be a good leader or not? I often go to Dilbert. Not that Dilbert has the solutions to business and corporate life, but Dilbert often points out the problems. Dilbert, I'd like you to meet Ben, our newest fast-track manager. Ben has no real experience, but he's very tall, so we know he'll go far. He also says, I have executive-style hair. And the big boss is saying, we think it will turn silver. He's going to look like a CEO. And so we need to be aware of that. Now, there are some modern trait approaches which do give us some insights into what makes a good leader. For instance, one thing we'll talk about in here is emotional intelligence. A concern with traits relates to the recent interest in emotional intelligence. This includes, do you understand yourself? Are you self-aware? Do you know when you're being a jerk? Do you know when you're being helpful? Do you know when you're too far down? Do you know when you're too far up? The ability to manage emotions, the capacity to be hopeful and optimistic, empathy and social skills, interpersonal skills. These things have been found to be associated with people who are effective leaders. So we're not saying trait theories are bad, but we're saying we have to think about what the traits are. And the interesting thing is, many of the traits that do make somebody effective are things people can develop over time and become better at. Over time, trait research has considered certain traits essential. A few of them: self-confidence, honesty and integrity, and drive. Self-confidence. Self-confidence is assurance in one's own judgment, decision-making, ideas, and capabilities. I don't think this means that I'm right and you're wrong and I'm the one that makes all the decisions by any means. It means I'm assured enough to be able to say, this isn't my area, or I was wrong, but I'm still comfortable in my own skin. Okay? So I think it's different than ego. Ego is, I'm never wrong and what I say is always best. It's saying that I'm comfortable with my decision making. I know I'm good at it. Sometimes I'm wrong. I'm human. All right? And that's okay. Other things. Honesty and integrity are important. Honesty refers to truthfulness, non-deception. Implies an openness that subordinates welcome. Key thing is here, you tell the truth. You tell the whole truth. You don't hide things. All right? You don't throw in some lies and say, well, I tell the truth. I throw in some lies as well. All three of those are important. Integrity means that one is whole, all right? That their actions match their words. They keep their promises. I think a very important part of keeping your promises is being wary that you don't make promises that you are pretty certain you can't keep, all right? So keep that in mind. Part of it is not bragging, oh, I'll do that, and I'll do that, and I'll do that. It's great to do that, but, make sure they're things that you can follow through on and are willing to work to follow through on. The last trait that we do find has a big impact, just the honesty and integrity thing. A lot of people are like, this is business. Here's Dr. Fred Keel did a difficult job of quantifying the value of a leader's integrity for his book, Return on Character. And his findings are fascinating. Over a 7-year period, Keel collected data on 84 CEOs and compared employee ratings to their behavior to company performance. Kind of similar to what the authors, under the methodology of what the authors to the Leadership Challenge did. Keel found that high-integrity CEOs had a multi-year return of 9.4%. All right, so their financial returns were 9.4%. Low-integrity CEOs just 1.9%. What's more, employee engagement was 26% higher in organizations led by high-integrity CEOs. Keel describes high-integrity CEOs this way. They are often humble. They appeared to have very little concern for their career success or their compensation. The funny point about that is they all did better than the self-focused CEOs with regard to compensation and career success. It's sort of ironic. So this idea that this is business, you have to know when to sacrifice your integrity, and why, the truth, the lie is always better than the truth. A lot of people have that vision of business. That's bad business. We don't see that. You can come with examples. Maybe somebody lied their way to the top, but you can come up with an awful lot where they ended up in prison or worse, or you don't even hear about them because they fell to the bottom because they weren't trusted. Now, drive is another important thing. You gotta want to make things change. You gotta want to shake things up. The Leadership Challenge brings that up. And it's about change. So it's not just saying, well, I'm the leader now, and just do whatever you're doing. Drive refers to high motivation that creates effort by the leader. And it doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be every day. We all have our bad days. But in general, to be a leader, you've got to have some goals for you, for your organization, for your group that you're working on. Now, another approach to looking at leadership are the behavior approaches. Now, behavior approaches say that anyone who adopts the appropriate behavior can be a leader. You can be someone who may not have great emotional intelligence, but if you can fake it, maybe you can be okay. Now, again, it's going to be a lot easier, and it's better if you work, and it probably will lead you towards becoming things like more emotionally intelligent. But it's saying that the key is to know the key behaviors of leadership. Some examples. Autocratic versus democratic leadership, all right? Autocratic, that leader, their behaviors tend to centralize authority. They derive power from position, controls, rewards, coercion. We talk about autocratic countries where we have, one leader who's dictating what's going on, okay? Now, a democratic leader tends to delegate authority. It's not all about me, it's about us, and all about us working together. Some interesting things. Groups assigned to autocratic leaders in different studies perform well when the leader was present. Interesting thing, though, is groups assigned to democratic leaders also performed well when the leader was present. So if the leaders are there, watching the people, monitoring them, seeing what's going on, checking up on them, either of these can be effective. I'm not saying they're necessarily nice, but, or equally as nice, but they either can be effective. The big telling thing, though, is studies found that groups assigned to democratic leaders performed well when the leader was present or not present. All right? Groups assigned to democratic leaders performed well when the leader was present or not present because they learned to make decisions on their own. I mean, do you really want to have to monitor your people 24/7? All right? Also, the groups assigned to democratic leaders had higher worker satisfaction. They tend to want to stay with the company more. They tended to be more engaged. In today's modern organizations, most leadership stress more democratic ideals, where it's us. It's not me and your tools that I'm using. It's us, and we work together to achieve goals. Now, a group of other studies looking at the behavior of leaderships were done actually by two football rivals. Last year, I wouldn't have said this had been a rivalry anymore, but we'll start with the Ohio State side. A bunch of researchers from Ohio State went out and looked at what are the behaviors of leaders. And they ended up putting them into two main categories. One category they called consideration. Consideration. This describes the extent to which a leader is sensitive to subordinates, respects their ideas and feelings, and works to establish mutual trust. Listening, seeking their input, showing empathy. Things where they're looking at people as people. Now, also important were what they called initiating structure. Initiating structure describes the extent to which the leader is task-oriented, because there is a job we need to get done here. You might say, my leader should always be super supportive of me and always be thinking about my well-being, but the leader also has to think about how do we get the job done, all right? Because they report to a board of directors or a boss or somebody that's saying, we want to see these returns, these results. So initiating structure describes the extent to which the leader is task-oriented, directs the subordinates towards goal achievement. So two broad approaches, supporting the people as people and kind of getting the task done with the people. Now, University of Michigan studies, the other football rival, came to actually very similar conclusions. I think that they used a little more friendly labels. They had employee-centered leaders. These display a focus on the human needs of their subordinates through dimensions of leader support, facilitating positive interaction among followers, getting your people working together, getting them, to know each other, and you getting to know them. Now, job-centered leaders direct activities toward efficiency, cost-cutting, and scheduling is expressed through the dimensions of goal emphasis and work facilitation. Another study, which people said came out pretty much independently, the leadership grid model used very similar approaches to think about leadership. The leadership grid model is a two-dimensional leadership theory that describes major leadership styles based on measuring both concern for people, sounds familiar to the different things within the Ohio State model and Michigan model, and concern for production, getting the job done. And it ends up being this figure. And we can fill in the green stuff for that, all right? Here we have concern for people, all right? That how are my people doing today? Are they feeling all right? Am I building good relationships with them? And down here, concern for production. Are we getting the job done that we are hired to do? And we have to remember that. And they said managers or leaders can fall into a variety of different categories. We can have some leaders who don't care about production and they don't care about people. They slam their door and you don't hear from them all day. They call that impoverished leadership. You have some that are all about just getting the job done. They just look at their people as tools. Authority compliance approach. You have some people that they care a lot about their people and not that much about the production. That's a country club style in this model. And then combining both, the team style, and the middle of the road was a little bit of each of those approaches. Now, again, just to review, the team style was high on both dimensions, thinking about let's get the job done and I care about my people. You're working together to accomplish goals. Country club style, emphasis was given to people over work output. Are my people happy? Are we getting the job done? Don't care that much, but I want my people to be happy. Authority and compliance was all I care about the job. If you're not here tomorrow, I could care less. Middle of the road, a little bit of all of these things. And then finally, impoverished means the absence of a leadership philosophy. I don't really care about production, and I really don't care about my people. I just care about taking a nap before the day is over. So we have three different studies here: University of Michigan studies, Ohio State studies, and the leadership grid studies. And there is some commonalities that we can pull out of those. And they refer to this as the idea of high leadership. The high and the high are high on people, high on production. One, the other, neither, both. All right? The research culminated in the behavior approach, two dominant types of leadership behavior: people-oriented, where I'm talking to my people, I'm developing relationships with my people, I'm asking them if they're happy, and task-oriented. Here's how we get the job done types of things. Now, we can see how these kind of fell out. The people-oriented behaviors and the task-oriented behaviors. Ohio State had consideration, was people-oriented. Initiating structure was task-oriented. University of Michigan, employee-centered was what they called their people orientation, and task-centered was their job-centered was the task-oriented. And then the leadership grid model had concern for people and concern for production. We get the idea that the behaviors have to be involved in two of those things. Some people say it's all about supporting your people. Well, it is, but you've also got to think about getting the job done. Other people say it's just about getting the output. Well, but if you don't support your people in today's day and age, you're not going to be, in the long run, doing that well. Okay? These findings raise three interesting questions. One is whether people orientation and task orientation exist together in the same leader, and how. Is it the person who's either I'm all about the people or I'm all about getting the job done? Or can we have a mix of both? Also, whether high leadership is universal or situational. Does it depend on the situation? Because in class next time, we will talk about contingency models. And some of them will say, well, maybe sometimes it's best to emphasize concern for production, and sometimes it's best to emphasize concern for people, and sometimes it's best to emphasize a concern for both. There are some people that will say, let's go back to here, that research has indicated some universality. All right, people-oriented behavior is associated with higher employee satisfaction, fewer personnel problems. Task-oriented behavior is associated with higher productivity. We need both of those. Then the big question is whether people can actually change themselves into leaders high on people or task orientation. Can you learn to be one or the other? All right. The evidence from studies seems to suggest that people can learn to do both. They can be both people-oriented and production-oriented if they're open to trying. And they can use a mix of those two behaviors. So it's not just about, well, I'm here to support my people or I'm here to get the job done. It's using a mix of both at different times. All right? There is a general belief that high leadership, or the ability to do both, is important. It's a desirable quality because the leader is going to meet both needs simultaneously, getting the task done and working with the people. Okay? Next time we will, and this will be in class. Oh no, I want to go through individualized approaches, right? Yeah, let's go through individualized approaches. There's a general belief that high leadership is a desirable quality because the leader will meet both needs simultaneously, the task and the people. Okay? Oh, actually, let's stop there, and I will just pick up on page 13. We'll have plenty of time, I think, in class when we meet again. So you're good. Make sure you get everything else done and ready. Check the syllabus, the due dates, stuff like that. Remember, time goes quick on these things, and good luck with everything. Let me know if you got questions. Bye.